Hello, everybody. My name is Irina Part, and I'm very happy to start this new season of our seminars, Understanding Subordinate. And just to remind you that these seminars are part of a research project called Orthodoxy as Solidarity, an examination of popular and conciliar orthodoxy in Estonia during the long 20th century. And these seminars are done as part of this project at the University of Tartu. And the project that has been already running for a year, it's going to continue, and it's generously funded by Estonian Research Council. So today we have a very important speaker who will be introduced by my co-host Andrei Shishkov, who is also the member of this project. So Andrei, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina, and I'm very glad to introduce our speaker, Dr. Barbara Hallensleben, Professor of Dogmatics and Ecumenical Theology at the Institute of Ecumenical Studies of the Faculty of Theology of the University of Freiburg, Switzerland. Professor Hallensleben is a founder and director of the St. Nicholas Center for the Study of the Eastern Churches, and she, for 2 terms, was a member of the Joint International Commission for Theological Dialogue between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. And now she's a consultant of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity. The term of papal primacy has been a divisive one between Orthodox and Roman Catholics for centuries, but in 20th century, both sides expressed their willingness to begin a dialogue and started discussing how to make sure that the topic would not longer divide the churches. To do this, primacy had to be balanced by synodality, which became especially important after Vatican II. Today, Professor Hallensleben gives us an overview of the discussions on primacy and synodality in the Church in the official Catholic Orthodox Theological Dialogue, and shares with us her critical analysis of it. A few words about the rules for the new participants. Our speaker will speak for 20 or 30 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session about 40-45 minutes. To ask a question, you can raise your hand virtually or live. Then I will see you and give you the floor. It is better to raise your hand virtually because there are a lot of us and I don't see all the participants on the general board. Okay, and let's begin. And Barbara, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andrei. Thank you to everybody for the honor of inviting me. For me, it is always very difficult to prepare for an audience that I do not know. In this sense, I think your questions might become more important than what I say, but I will try my best. So I add maybe some words because it might be important to the very nice introduction by Andrei. My main focus within my research responsibility as a professor of dogmatics and as engaged in ecumenical studies is the translation of the works of the Russian Orthodox theologian Sergei Bulgakov into German. And I have also translated the documents of the Orthodox Synod of Crete 2016 into German, and also the recent document for the life of the world towards a social ethos of the Orthodox Church of the year 2020. So you see, we in Freiburg, we always try to combine theological reflection with a kind of confidential collaboration with the church life. This might be typical for us. So during the dialogue, I'm still a member of this international commission. I started to participate since 2006. This means the 9th plenary assembly in Belgrade in Serbia. And this fits well with our topic today because this assembly was the first one to shift the focus onto conciliarity and authority. Authority later became primacy. I have only participated in Belgrade and in Chieti. Maybe I will tell you later why. Chieti was the plenary assembly of the year 2016. So my second point already is the International Orthodox-Catholic Dialogue, background and development, in order to give you an idea how it came up and what the reasons were. The official dialogue, as it is now conducted, was announced in the year 1979, but it did not fall from the sky. I will mention a few important points that made it possible from the Catholic side, from the Orthodox side, and on the level of dialogue. On the Catholic side, it was, as Andre already said, the Second Vatican Council and a change in attitude towards ecumenical dialogue. From the very beginning in the documents of the Council and later on, a clear distinction was made between dialogue with the communities that developed out of the Reformation inside the Western tradition, with whom there is a real division in need of reconciliation, and on the other hand, a dialogue with the sister churches of the East, which are recognized as true churches of Jesus Christ. So all Catholic churches in the plural and Orthodox churches in the plural are in search of a common expression of their already existing unity. It was crucial for this view that the Catholic Church learned during the Council to speak of itself in a plural again, by saying the one Catholic Church consists in and out of particular churches that are in communion with each other and with the bishop and the local church of Rome. You see that this view abandons the anti-Protestant centralism between the Council of Trent in the 16th century and Vatican II, 400 years of Catholic unity and centralism, and creates the basis for the development of the Catholic understanding of synodality, conciliarity, sobornost. So if I say most of the time synodality, it's because this word is the most used in the official dialogue. The Vatican Council uses the term particular churches for the inner Catholic plurality and the term sister, or later sister churches, first of all, for the Orthodox plurality. More and more after the Council, a theology of sister churches developed, and Pope John Paul II had the brilliant idea of applying the term sister churches in the same way to both the Catholic churches in the plural and the Orthodox churches. So you see the change. If the church is only one church, as the Catholic Church considered itself for 400 years, it needs only one decision and one pope is sufficient. If the church itself is made up of a plurality of churches, you need synodality because you need a common way, a common journey in dialogue. That is why many synodal initiatives emerged after the Second Vatican Council within the Catholic Church. For example, the Synod of Bishops all over the world, the bishops' conferences that were strengthened, local synods took place in countries and dioceses. So a first intermediate conclusion for Catholics, synodality is not just a discovery from the ecumenical dialogue. On the Orthodox side, it seems to me that the most important discovery here is that each of the Orthodox churches has developed a relationship of primacy in the figure of the Patriarch or the Archbishop, and synodality within itself. But actually, they have no forms of synodality togetherness, synodal togetherness among the local churches. This has led to the efforts to convoke a pan-Orthodox council, which lasted about 100 years, and in the end brought together only 10 or 14 autocephalous churches in Crete in 2016. As I translated these documents, the key word that appears in all the paragraphs is unity, unity, unity. A side effect of the dialogue is the development of a new Orthodox body, the so-called synaxis of the heads of the autocephalous churches. We should not forget that a true synodality among the Orthodox churches would also have to include the Oriental Orthodox churches, which at least at the earliest of the 7 ecumenical councils still belonged to the one world of the Christian East. So, second intermediate conclusion, synodality is a strength, but also a deficiency on the Orthodox side. We currently see how difficult it is to solve inner Orthodox conflicts in a synodal way. Now, the level of the Orthodox-Catholic dialogue. This dialogue had already begun before Vatican II. Maybe 2 charismatic leaders are not least responsible for this, Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras of Constantinople. The testimonies of this new approach are collected in the Tomos Agapis, in the volume of love. So I have one of these precious books. Maybe if you do not have it in your library, I have some more copies. I will send you one of them. The documents edited together by the Vatican and by the FANAR, they are from 1958 until 1970. So if I said the official dialogue started in 1979, you see that many results have already been achieved a long time before. The dialogue of truth, which is the key word for the official theological dialogue, was preceded by a dialogue of love, Tomos Agapis, the volume of love. The aim was to get to know and to appreciate each other anew. Within this framework, the mutual visits of Pope Paul VI in Constantinople and of Patriarch Athenagoras in Rome took place, as well as the meeting of the 2 leaders in Jerusalem in January of 1964. On this occasion, the icon of the embrace of the apostles, Peter and Andrew, you know it, came up. It was a gift that was prepared by Patriarch Athenagoras and given to Paul VI, and you can still see it in the office of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity in Rome. This meeting in Jerusalem also led to the joint declaration on the excommunications of the famous year 1054 in December 1965, where you find the words that these excommunications were to be erased from the memory of the Church. This means no longer stand in the way and block the reproachment. We observe an important result of this development. The Tomos Agapis is taking place between Rome and Constantinople. It is not entirely clear who these partners are. Is Constantinople one local church, as Rome is also a local church, among others? Or does Constantinople stand for the entire Orthodox world? The first interpretation reminds of the first millennium, where there was a simple duality between Latins and Greeks corresponding to the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. But things changed, at least since the fall of Constantinople under Ottoman rule after 1453. Constantinople is now Istanbul. The Patriarchate of Constantinople is no longer automatically speaking for the entirety of Orthodoxy. For me, it became clear very late that the rapprochement between Rome and Constantinople has contributed to the image that the Orthodox world forms unity under the leadership of Constantinople. This corresponds to the image that the Patriarch of Constantinople has of himself, but it does not correspond to the image that a large number of other local Orthodox churches have. This problem has entered now the official Orthodox-Catholic Dialogue. As Cardinal Kurt Koch recently confirmed to me, the agreement on the official dialogue includes a condition. The condition says, the Catholic Church speaks only with the entirety of the Orthodox churches and does not engage in bilateral dialogues with the different local Orthodox churches. The consequence for the present situation is very difficult. If, for example, what is the case actually, the Russian Orthodox Church decides that it can no longer participate in the dialogue, there are two possible interpretations and decisions. Either the Catholic partners say, oh, unfortunately, then we cannot continue the dialogue because Constantinople is no longer able to bring all Orthodox churches together on one table. Or the conclusion is the opposite. The Catholics could say, we can no longer talk to the Russian Orthodox Church because it refuses the participation in the official dialogue. I would like, maybe later we can discuss my problem in conscience, what I will do when the next meeting is convoked, but voila. So the third part is a short overview about the topics and results in the official course of the dialogue, only with the year, the place, and the topic. I think I will show this list to you because then it is easier to just not to follow that I read numbers and places. Yes, here you see, in 79, the dialogue was announced. In 1980, it started on Patmos and Rhodos. The topic was the mystery of the Church and the Eucharist in the light of the mystery of the Holy Trinity, a typical topic that would never appear in Catholic Protestant dialogue, for example. This topic continued in 1982 in Munich in Germany. Then the sacramental aspect continued, 1984 on Crete, faith, sacraments, and unity of the Church. Once again, or continued in 1987 in Bari, famous place of St. Nicholas in Italy. 1988, Valamo in Finland, the sacrament of order with an accent on apostolic succession. This, yeah, it was finished there. And then the change came in 1990 in Freising in Germany, still with a quite short declaration on uniatism and proselytism. This topic was taken up in 1993 in Balamand, Lebanon, leading to the famous document on uniatism, method of union of the past, and present search for full communion. You see the direction towards communion, towards the one church is still very present. Then you have to wait for 7 years until in the year 2000, the next meeting took place in the United States. This topic, ecclesial ecclesiological and canonical implications of uniatism was only a very short formal statement, and we need a short break. Why? The first dialogues from Valamo in 1988. Oh, I guess I can still give you a look on this list. So until Valamo, 1988, you have a kind of success story. The atmosphere was rather cordial, the agreement extensive. The Regensburg Ecumenical Symposia in Germany preceded and accompanied this official dialogue, also with a cordial rapprochement. The break was initiated by the assembly in Ballamand in 1993. Although uniatism was clearly rejected here, the rejection of the whole document came not from the Catholic side, but from the Orthodox side, especially from Greek circles, which strictly rejected the application that you find in this document of the term sister churches to the Catholic churches. So the document, you could say, was not received like the document of union of the Council of Florence was not received by the Orthodox world. So a relatively long break started. It was no longer possible to issue more than a short diplomatic final statement in Emitsburg in the year 2000. In 2006, where I entered the commission was completely renewed and began to focus on the issue of primacy and synodality. You see the first topic, the ecclesiological and canonical consequences of the sacramental nature of the church, already discussed before, conciliarity and authority in the church at 3 levels of ecclesial life, local, regional, universal. This continued in 2007 in Ravenna. So there was a great hope that very soon this document could be finished. 2009, in Paphos on Cyprus, the role of the Bishop of Rome in the communion of the church in the first millennium. You see a historical approach. This continued in Vienna, once again, very quickly, 1 year later. In Amman, in Jordan, the precise, more systematic approach on primacy and synodality or conciliarity in the church, which led to the agreed document in 2016 in Chieti in Italy, where I was present again. As you see, the Commission, because this is really the last official meeting in 2016 in Chieti, has not met for over 5 years now. The work continues in the small committee, which is working on 2 topics as far as I am informed. The first one is a kind of evaluation of all the results and the open questions from the previous meetings. So a kind of what Cardinal Kasper recently called the harvesting of fruits. And the second topic is in continuity to the document of Chieti, which was limited to the first millennium, the question of the second millennium, but this implies clearly returning to the critical questions of Ballamand, including what is called uniatism. So now some personal experiences in order to give you an impression how such a dialogue takes place. Only according to my experiences. Other people and members might have other experiences. So the commission is made up by 60 persons, 30 Catholics and 30 Orthodox representatives, about half of them bishops, hierarchs, and half of them theologians. The Orthodox delegation includes 2 persons from each autocephalous church. The Orthodox delegation is chaired by a representative of the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the other co-president is the president of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity. However, an interesting development, the Orthodox delegation in Chieti 2016 insisted that the candidate for the new co-presidency must also be explicitly elected or at least confirmed by the entirety of the Orthodox delegate, so is not automatically sent by Constantinople. My first experience in Belgrade, the meeting took place in an expensive hotel, in a huge hall, downstairs, without windows, with air conditioning, translators. The translators were good, but usually there were some people in the commission, and there are still people in these meetings who do not know any of the also used for translations languages, so that do not understand what is happening. The first act in such meeting is a separate meeting for each delegation, the Catholics and the Protestants, and the Orthodox, to discuss their approach. And I found myself like in the preparation of a football match where you must think about the strategy to defeat your opponent. Many of the bishops are not intellectuals and do not have much experience with ecumenical dialogue. So it is really not a situation, an atmosphere to build trust, to experience ecclesial communion, and to really understand each other, because there is nothing of the feeling where people live, how they use words, what their main concerns are, etc. I would also like to mention a positive experience. When in Chieti we discussed in the end which topic to choose for the next meetings, and the second millennium was proposed, many members were concerned by fear that the catastrophe of Balamand in 1993 could repeat. But then, once again, the atmosphere changed, and it was said and agreed, we know each other so well now, and we all agree that our main purpose is communion in the unity of the Church of Christ. So we should also be able now to touch the difficult issues and really to discuss them. I have to finish with some theological perspectives, because up to now I said very little about the theological content, about these questions of primacy and synodality. I'm a theologian, so in a certain sense, this is my main concern. But you see, all this context, this situation of communication is so important and influences also the content that you should never forget it. Some points. First of all, the good news. The good news is that many agreed about the fact that the topic of primacy and synodality is a kind of last obstacle, of the last issue that has to be clarified, and that there is no other obstacle to declare ecclesial koinonia if these difficulties are solved. This was the great hope by choosing this topic. The less good news. It is a very abstract question. Nobody is against synodality. We have to be on the way together. We talk to each other. We have to take joint decisions. In the end, no one is against some kind of primacy, because we know someone has to convene and to chair a meeting and to summarize the outcome. But the contexts, the procedures, the implications are extremely difficult, depending on who is talking in which framework. Behind the two terms, there are experiences, fears, suspicions, and also what you could call holy convictions that you do not want to bring into danger. but that needed to be clarified, and in my opinion, cannot be clarified only by this theological work and such kind of papers alone. One way of dealing with these questions is to choose the historical approach. This was done in the beginning. This means we first look at what happened in history. Then we decide in a kind of normative way, because it was like this in history, we will do it also today, or we are allowed to continue this tradition today. Sometimes this approach is helpful, but often it is difficult or misleading because the view of history itself is already very different. Often new answers to new situations are needed, which cannot simply be derived from history. That is why the Commission has tried again and again, especially in Ravenna, already in the absence of the Russian Orthodox delegation, to propose a more systematic approach. For the topic of primacy and synodality, what was said seems to be quite simple and at first glance to be quite credible. And I can resume it in the following way. At every level of the church, the local, it means the Episcopal Church, the eparchy, the diocese, the regional level, it means in the local autocephalous church, and on the universal international level, there should be a first, a protos, a primate, and a synod around him. This idea is largely based on the theology of John Zizioulas, who has for a certain time been the Orthodox co-president of the Commission. His proposal is welcomed by many Catholics because the idea of a protos on the universal level seems to justify the Catholic idea of primacy. But there is also justified criticism. For example, at the level of the single Episcopal Church, there is no synodality in the sense of consultation among equals, because here the bishop alone really represents Christ and embodies unity. Of course, in togetherness with priests, deacons, and the whole people of God, but not in a synod of equals. Above all, however, criticism came from the Orthodox side by asking the question, will this theological structure, even more if it is justified with the model of the Most Holy Trinity, not lead to an Orthodox Pope on the Universal Orthodox level, and in this sense of two churches, once again looking for their relation among these two. At present, Patriarch Bartholomew is accused of understanding himself precisely in this way. There are clearly questions that need to be clarified, not only in the Orthodox-Catholic dialogue, but also within the respective theological and ecclesial traditions. In the Orthodox sphere, the role of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople is disputed and needs to be clarified anew. This also implies the question of a pan-Orthodox synodality or conciliarity. We can come back to this during the discussion. In the Catholic sphere, Pope Francis, as you know, has taken an initiative and called the whole Catholic Church to a synodal journey. Maybe the inspiration by the Orthodox world has played a role for this decision. But if you look at what is actually happening, he seems rather to follow the pressure for reform within the church. Pope Francis literally has called for everyone, you find this word, everyone should be able to participate actively in a worldwide consultation process. I looked 2 times, 3 times, really, it was written, everybody should participate. This is in line with the Second Vatican Council, which speaks of the sense of faith of the people of God. This means every baptized and believing person has received the Spirit of God and can be a witness to his or her faith. The Synod of Bishops that is convoked for 2023, which is to be prepared by this worldwide synodal process, will have synodality as its main topic. So it will not only be a synod, it will be a synod on synodality. At present, in discussion circles, on questionnaires, all have the opportunity to express their opinion. You will find mainly those who have enough time and theological training and capacity of communication who are participating. So it means in the end, there are few who are participating. And I have the impression that the ecumenical aspect and the presence of Christians of other traditions is rather large. So I do not see really an ecumenical aspect in this process. This brings me to my final remark. In Chieti, it was stated that the word synodality has 2 meanings. On the one hand, it describes the nature of the whole church. The church is synodal because the community of believers is on a common journey towards heaven, towards the glory of God, however you will describe it. The second meaning of synodality is much more narrow. In synods, the church interrupts its constant synodal journey, as it were, in order to discuss open questions, controversial issues, and to agree anew in order to find a new orientation for the ongoing common way. So the large signification of synodality. This second type of synod is a little bit a sign of crisis. You do not know any longer where to go. Necessary, but a form of crisis. I think we are in this situation where this path and these initiatives will lead is not yet foreseeable, and that might be a good thing because it leaves room for God's Holy Spirit and for our discussion. So I finished.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for such an interesting and thought-provoking presentation. And let's move on to the questions. And I repeat, you can raise your hand virtually or live, but better virtually. And then I will give you the floor. Please. Maybe I would like to start while others thinking. You said about the influence of Metropolitan John Zizioulas on this systematic conception of relations between primacy and synodality, and for example, in Ravenna document, we see the example of this influence. But my question is there an analogy of this principle in the Catholic theology? For example, Henri de Lubac, with whom Zizioulas is often compared. What ground for this conception inside the Catholic theology?
Good question, which needs a lot of analysis. In my opinion, as I said, Catholics too easily like the approach because it seems to justify primacy. If you look more carefully, in my opinion, and I hope so, there is no clear analogy, because this abstract principle of everywhere you need a protos and a circle of consultants applies to everything, not only to the church, to every management. Whereas the church, in its approach, taking up the history of salvation, does not say we need the functional principle of a first one and of some consultants, but says there is a first one, and there is this circle of apostles, and this community and apostles, and this tradition is transmitted in a sacramental way through history. So the reference is Christological and is the history of salvation. And then you have to see how this fits to new decisions. There I would need more time to develop it. But to answer it in a very simple way, no, I do not think there is a clear analogy in Catholic ecclesiology with the theology of Sisiulas.
Thank you. Yes, it's true. Please ask your questions. Please, Paul Valliere.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Hallensleben, for that talk. It's stimulating in so many different ways. One point that you came back to over and over again was the status of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. I mean, this continued to come up throughout your talk. And this year, 2022, is the centennial of the Greek catastrophe in Asia Minor, when essentially the Patriarch of Constantinople lost what flock he had left, except for the Greek diaspora, mainly in the Americas, small communities in Europe. Listening to the talk and thinking about the issues, it's possible, I think, to interpret the last 100 years as the odyssey of the Patriarch of Constantinople trying to somehow regain a flock, define his status in a radically changed world, which introduces what I'm tempted to say is a non-theological dynamic into the theological dialogue. Where do you see the Patriarch of Constantinople going from here on this common journey, particularly in our century? I'm not asking you to do, futurology a long time from now, but in the near future, if in fact this is a hierarch who is still in some sense in search of a flock, a new flock.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this remark. So I do not think I can give an answer, but in this context, what is important is to ask the question. And I think the problem is that actually the question is not permitted to be asked because everything seems to be clear and it is not. And I fully understand that this need of a new clarification, it is necessary. First of all, what has to be clarified is the old status of the emperor in his responsibility for the unity of the church in the first millennium or until the fall of Constantinople. So I think this is an element, if you do not clarify that his role has theological aspects, not only political aspects. He was the representative of the fact that Jesus brought to us the capacity to rule the world. And there is a kind of duality between the power of this world and the witness of the church. This was represented by this duality and got lost. So this has to be clarified. The second point that has to be clarified is what followed the fall of Constantinople in 1453, where the Patriarchate was completely founded in a new way. And as I read in recent research publications, it was founded as a kind of the model for the Ottoman millet system. So, and this completely changed the relation of the Patriarch to the Orthodox faithful people. And it makes understandable that whole countries who wanted to separate from the Ottoman Empire had to separate from the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So these dynamics are not really clarified. If you enter the Fanar, you will find two mosaic representations. On the one hand, you have the Apostle Andrew showing that this church comes from the apostles. On the other side, you have the Sultan Mehmed giving a model of the church to the Patriarch. So the foundation by the Ottoman Empire. And I think these two images are not yet reconciled. And what I followed the last years, and I think I analyzed it from the Catholic point, that what the Catholics did in their way of joining the dialogue was that they helped the Patriarchate of Constantinople to create itself in this image of being the Orthodox Pope. This is the Catholic contribution. Now, the Orthodox way of constructing this role has to be analyzed also by the Orthodox. The role of Andrew, for example. So if you take the old model of this icon, it was an icon not of Peter and Andrew, it was the icon of Peter and Paul. And it was taken, it is not the holy tradition of iconography. It is a kind of political invention in order to give the Patriarch an apostolic foundation, even more precious than Peter, because Peter was the one who learned by Andrew that the Messiah came. So all this kind of new analysis without creating ideologies around historical changes, which have to be just to be accepted and of course to be interpreted in the Holy Spirit, this work has to be done and is still not fully done. And the Catholics should be careful, because many Catholics are newly initiated to this Orthodox Catholic dialogue. So normally they venerate what they hear and they follow what they hear. So they can be used also to confirm Orthodox ideas about themselves in different ways. So, and there we have to contribute and to accompany this dialogue so that this mistake does not happen.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, the ecclesiological role of the emperor is still unclear, and now we are confronted with the quite secular notions that the church should be separated from the state, and it comes to the past. Emperors should separate from the church. You're very right about it. The next question from Irina Pert.
Thank you. I just wanted to continue on this topic that Paul has raised and Barbara has given this fascinating answer. So I just refer to what you said earlier about the use of history, historical approach. And you mentioned that it serves to kind of to establish normativity. And what I think what you've just said about the way in which this iconography was invented and how the Roman Catholic Church constructed Patriarchate of Constantinople as a kind of parallel, you know, papacy in the Eastern Christianity. I think it shows that, you know, history also is showing how normativity is invented, so to say. So, and I think maybe because I'm speaking as a historian here, that we need to look at history from this kind of dual perspective. On the one hand, trying to understand, you know, how certain notions came about and relatively recently, and how certain understandings of synodality and primacy also were imbued with certain, you know, historical meanings. I think this is a helpful approach. And one thing I was always thinking about the council, historical councils, that we know a lot about the proceedings of the councils, but we often lack sufficient sources about the actual atmosphere of the council. And what you've just shared with us, your own experience of being there and participating in some of these let's say dialogue discussions among your own you know, confessions. So it shows us that there is certain amount of you know, let's say dialogue and communication and behavior, and which is not reflected in these kind of written proceedings that historians study. So therefore, I think we need to kind of look at this whole development of conciliarity and synodality, not just on the basis of documents and on what people say, but also, you know, what they do, how they behave, and what happens, you know, before, after, and during this session. So I think that would be very interesting. But again, you know, we need more witnesses like you from the previous centuries who could talk to us about it. So this is just a comment, but maybe you have something to add to that.
Thank you so much. I fully agree. I just feel a kind of tension here, because on the one hand, I am fully confident as a faithful Christian that God may use our elements of our weakness, even for good things that are inserted into the history of salvation. But on the other hand, this should not lead us to be blind and to glorify things that are just human and just a mixture of good intentions and sometimes also bad intentions. And we should really look and see. There is this famous word of Pope Hadrian VI in the 16th century, in the time of Reformation. And he was only Pope for some months. And with all this mess of the Reformation and the lack of Reformation inside the Catholic Church, and he said, God does not need our lies. And I like to repeat it. We have to say what we see.
Thank you so much. Next question from Joona Toivonen, and then Father Enderlove.
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I was thank you for the lecture and thank you for the insightful ideas. I was reflecting on both the written article that we were asked to read before attending this lecture, and also the YouTube lecture by Andrew Louth, Professor Andrew Louth, and he mentioned something that really intrigued me, as I've been also reading another Orthodox theologian, David Bentley Hart, and also someone who in the Anglican world shares quite a bit of his ideas, John Milbank. And the idea that intrigued me was the idea of the sobernos, not as the idea of sort of the sort of communality or conciliarity as something that describes the church coming together, but rather a term that is also an ontological term, or rather a term which designates a sort of an epistemology, and I find it really intriguing because I feel that maybe at the root of a change in the way we view the church is not to sort of view the church as something that is separate from the world. And I'm here reminded also of Maximus Confessor's The Mystagogy of the Church, where he also equivocates the church as the sort of recreated, the world recreated, and I just find this idea fascinating, that it's so much more than just the descriptive and sort of a descriptive word about the church coming together and deciding things, but rather it's a much deeper notion of the way the world is, as let's say that sort of a participatory ontology, people actually becoming or being who they are as beings who find their true being only through coming together and discovering themselves in that ontological, that reality of participatory ontology. And I think that's sort of released in my soul something, and sort of gave me a lot of sort of hope for the future. So that's just a sort of sharing what I found really exciting about this this concept, this idea. Thank you.
You want to add something, Barbara?
Thank you. Not for the moment. I like this ongoing and deepened reflection very much.
Okay, thank you, Jona. The next question from Father Andrew Louth, please. Father Andrew. Please unmute your microphone. We don't hear you.
Thank you. No.
Yeah, no.
No, is that all right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Oh dear. The whole discussion is getting terribly interesting, and perhaps what I was going to say was a bit out of date now, but I'll just make just 2 points. I mean, first of all, before saying anything, thank you very much to Professor Hallensleben for a really fascinating paper, which is raising lots and lots of questions. And I'm very particularly moved by the way in which your theological reflection, your historical reflections complement one another, because it seems to me it is very important that when we appeal to history, we are actually appealing to history and not to a kind of mythology of the past, which we often are doing. And that applies particularly to this St. Andrew business. As far as I can tell, and I once wrote a paper on this, Constantinople never really appealed to St. Andrew as being any importance until really the modern period. Photius, I mean, by the time of Photius, the life of St. Andrew was circulating, was very popular, but Photius never, ever suggests that his authority is to do with St. Andrew. And I think the reason is very simple, because he knew where his authority came from. His authority came from being the ecumenical patriarch, and that was tied up with the empire. He didn't need to sort of go anywhere else to find some sort of support. And we're never going to get anywhere anywhere as far as Rome has been able to get. St. Peter was genuinely concerned with the foundation of Rome. I don't think it's seriously in doubt that Peter was involved in the early Roman Church. There's no reason whatever to suppose that St. Andrew had anything to do with the origins of Constantinople's authority. But another thing, and it's connected with the point that Paul made about this millennium of the Greek disaster. It's another way of looking at it. You say it's a millennium of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and all that happened round about sort of 1918 or so on. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire meant that the Patriarch finally had no role. I mean, Bishop of Istanbul, pretty well. But at the same time, the Patriarchate of Moscow was also refounded. And it does seem to me that the last century, Orthodox history in the last century, can't really be understood unless it's understood that for 100 years, two patriarchates have been trying to establish a power base. On the one case, Moscow, it's come to it very late, because to start off with, it was just trying to survive, and it did survive, and it gradually sort of made its way into the sort of national psyche in some sort of way. But since 1989, the Patriarchate has been very, very, very keen to, Patriarchate of Moscow has been very keen to present itself as the biggest, most powerful patriarchate in the world. That's one sort of argument. The ecumenical patriarch, by what I must really, as a historian, just seems to me, a fanciful interpretation of Canon 28 of Hallensleben, claims that he has got lungs all over the world, even though he's got not much at home. And I think that when we're thinking about, well, it's very much in your paper to start off with, Professor Hallensleben, that the detachment of Moscow from what's going on is because it wants to be in charge, because it thinks it's the most important patriarchate. What's going on is being organized by the ecumenical patriarchate, which has got an entirely different agenda, which is trying to sort of have an agenda for the Orthodox Church in which it will be central. And they are, it seems to me, on a collision course, and we're all suffering. Those are my main contributions. There's some very lots of other interesting ideas that have been thrown up as the discussion has developed.
Thank you so much. I just think we should continue this discussion in a very open way, also seeing what happens and giving the confidence that we do not argue to destroy the other, but to bring out more truth and more love for one another.
Absolutely, but there's not much of that happening at the moment. Not as far as I can see it in the Orthodox world.
Yes, unfortunately. Yes, the next question from Natalia Munataeva. Please, Natalia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So if to come from the level of those who had voted in the dialogue to the level of people of God, as you said, have you come across any concerns or worries in connection to the dialogue? Why I'm asking this question, because I have very fresh impressions from London, where I was recently, and I heard so much anxiety in connection that the Archbishop Nikitas introduced some kind of meetings of the youth, of Orthodox youth with Catholic youth and probably Protestants, but I heard that most who visited those gatherings were Orthodox and Catholics, young people. So, and when I tried to look into the essence of that anxiety or concerns of the in the parishes, Greek parishes, that people started to say about the influence and about some expressed exactly the concern of the possible papacy in the Orthodox Church, which is very interesting because I'm sure that the same people have very vague knowledge of the historical events or something. I don't believe they are very much informed about the influence of the Catholic Church on the formation of the Constantinople. So do you know anything of that?
So I do not know anything about the example that you are talking about, but let's say the general idea to come back from the international dialogue of some very few experts in a very isolated way to what you call the grassroots level. So really changing the mentality of people, open their eyes for the richness of other traditions. I said that I only participated in the plenary assemblies in Belgrade in 2006 and in Chieti in 2016. And I will tell you what the reason was. The meetings always take place in September, October. And every time it was a kind of one of the starting weeks of the semester. And what do I do in the first weeks of the semester? I teach my students at the University of Freiburg Introduction to Ecumenism. So I'm very proud of having introduced for every student every Catholic student in the first year to have a course on history and theology of the Orthodox world. So I decided that it is more important that I start my lectures for a group of, let's say, 10 or 15 first-year students on Orthodoxy than to participate in the international dialogue. And I still think that I took a good decision. But you see, if these levels do not go together, of course, the documents will stay without life. So I remember from my Bulgakov studies that there was, and there still is, but maybe less vital, the Fellowship of St. Albans and St. Sergius of Russian Orthodox and Anglican students. They developed a very intensive, let's say, synodality, even up to the idea to share with the agreement of their respective bishops a kind of intercommunion, which was not realized in the end. But there you saw that such a living community, which is really based on common life and experiences, can be so fruitful, and we have to engage in this level. Not only, I love theology, I think we need it, absolutely, but these levels should go together. And there will be always some bishops or others who will accompany such meetings with their suspicion. And of course, they can be led in a bad way. But we should not give up the hope that they can also be led in a good way. And I engage also very much on this level.
Thank you so much. And the next question from Heather Coleman, please.
Thank you. So I have a question that sort of goes in it's sort of out of left field, but I've just been thinking about as you were speaking. I found it really fascinating to think about the rethinking of the Catholic Church as sister churches within the church and then sister churches beyond. That was really fascinating for me, and it helped me to understand a little bit better the whole patriarchal movement within the Ukrainian Catholic community. And I guess my question has to do with with churches such as the Ukrainian Catholic Church, and do these churches play a role in this sort of dialogue? So just curious.
Thank you. So there are maybe at least two questions. So the first question is, what is the role of these Oriental Catholic churches in the development of and deepening of the idea of sister churches within the Catholic Church? I think there they do not have a strong role. I think these change of perspective of really living the plurality of Catholic sister churches as dioceses has to be deepened also inside the Latin Church. The second question is how to, and it has not yet arrived really at a very deep level. So very often, especially the local churches, stay either in a kind of opposition to Rome, which is not the idea, or in a kind of obedience without responsibility in an enculturated way in their local churches. But this is really a huge problem within the Catholic Church. The role of the Oriental Catholic churches in the international dialogue. I think it is, first of all, there are always about, from these 30 Catholic members, I think up to 3 or 5 maximum, more 2 or 3 theologians and hierarchs of this tradition. And normally they are accepted and appreciated as persons, because they are well acquainted with this experience of dialogue, they are integrated, they are accepted as persons. And they help a little bit to overcome this suspicion that these Catholic churches are really fully destructive for the dialogue. But they are not helpful to overcome the problem of these communion with Rome. So I did some research, and I always tell it to my students, if you read the sources of what happened when these church unions from the end of the 16th century on were signed, you will find a horrible phenomenon. So I'm always near to tears when I read these documents. You will find that the Eastern churches remembered Rome for 2 reasons. They remembered that there was the Union of Florence, which was anyway in their mind. And secondly, they needed Rome, because normally there was an influence by the Protestant missionaries, and they knew that in Rome there were the Jesuits and good theologians, and they could have some help from Rome. So they tried to re-establish the old communion of the first millennium and the union of the Council of Florence, nothing else. So when they came to Rome, the mentality of the Roman people had completely changed, and the popes and the Roman people considered these delegations from the Eastern churches as some kind of noble Protestants who have to be converted, and conversion meant you can only be a Christian and you can only be saved if you enter into the obedience of the Pope. So the role of the Pope, and this is the inner Catholic change, was very strong. So this centralism, the idea that being in the true church depends on obedience to the Bishop of Rome, only was developed in such a strong way after Reformation. So the way how these Orthodox, these Eastern Christians were integrated was completely against the idea of sister churches, and was not at all accepting them as the old sisters and brothers in the same faith, but was a kind of submission to the Roman Pope. This is a shame for the Catholics, and I think Catholics should admit it. So, and this means that inside the Catholic Oriental ecclesiology, there is a kind of original fall. You cannot save it. You have to reconstruct it also. And this is not only a problem of the Orthodox Catholic dialogue, but this is also an inner Catholic process of but also a kind of, here you should really have a kind of memory and reconciliation. So it means to apologize for what Catholics did in the 16th and 17th century with a completely wrong and horrible papal ecclesiology that has been imposed to the Eastern Christians. A long story. I will come back to tell you more about it.
Thank you. Next question from Irina, once more.
Well, again, you know, just a short remark about the continuation of the story of the Uniates who in the 18th and 19th century were converted back to Orthodoxy, and this is something that, you know, the methods by which this happened, something that the Orthodox Church should repent of. So there is a kind of continuation, and Heather is, of course, quite aware of that. So, but my question was actually about what you mentioned earlier about the fact that the Roman Catholic Church doesn't enter into bilateral dialogue with, if I understood you correctly, with the different autocephalous churches. So, when we are discussing this kind of situation like today among the Orthodox churches, so then the question is, is there any way out of this? And if you compare, for example, the Orthodox Catholic dialogue to the dialogue with the Protestant churches, is there any, I just don't know much about it. So how would Rome, for example, deal with different Protestant churches? Would they try to put them all together and have dialogue with them as one body? So surely, you know, there are some differences there. So that's one question. But the second question is coming back to terminology and to what Jonas has raised in the usage of the term synodality in today's Roman Catholic discourse. Is there any meaning of synodality as Catholicity, as, for example, in the usage of the term sobornist? And this is, I think, so this kind of ontological understanding of the term. So could you maybe say something about the term synodality?
So sorry for my telephone ringing. It will just stop. So first of all, the bilateral dialogues. Of course, this is a question of the initial contract. So when the dialogue with the Orthodox partners was opened, this condition entered into the agreement. And for this reason, Cardinal Kurt Koch refers to it. But indeed, there are, of course, bilateral dialogues, for example, on another level. Maybe, for example, the memory of the meeting between Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill in Havana took place already 5 times with a kind of symposium. You would never call it, the Romans would never call it a dialogue, but they try to have some kind of continuity. And of course, these bilateral dialogues are possible if the local churches engage. So I tried once, for example, the first time I was successful, the second time not. I tried to organize an official meeting between the Swiss Bishops' Conference and the Bishops' Assembly of the Orthodox Bishops, created after some pre-conciliar meeting. It was really an adventure, but in the end, they met in a very formal way. But I tried to explain to them, if you take seriously that we Catholics, officially, we call the Orthodox churches our sister churches, and sister churches are defined like particular churches in the council, then you cannot be bishop in Switzerland without asking your Orthodox colleagues what to do in pastoral questions. It's impossible to explain to Catholic bishops that this is a reality. My second proposal is to take out the dialogue with the Orthodox churches from the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, because if we say they are sister churches, they are already the church, and we do not have to promote a Christian unity that does not exist. So we should attach the dialogue to the Congregation for Faith. And so this is the idea. And of course, there are dialogues necessarily with Protestants, with groups that do not cover the whole world, because the Lutheran World Confederation is a local initiative, and a new dialogue will start with the Protestant churches of Europe. And there I told Cardinal Koch that this is a mistake, because there is a CCEE, that is the Council of Bishops' Conferences of Europe. And in my opinion, if the Catholic partner would be coherent with the Second Vatican Council, they would tell the the European Protestants that your dialogue partner is the Union of European Catholic Bishops' Conferences. You see, they do not realize the fact that they should accept the local churches as ecclesial actors. So now your question of Catholicity maybe comes back a little bit to this participatory ontology, which was already mentioned in the discussion. So it's a real problem, actually, in the use of words, that there is a huge ambiguity in the use of words. So synodality, for most, even my colleagues in the Faculty of Theology, and especially at this moment in the famous German synodal process, is used in a very functional and purely functional way. We should create places to bring people together in a huge hall with air conditioning, and they should talk and say that we should, in fact, in the end, ordain women. And this is what is coming out. I even know by a Swiss bishop that he circulates these questionnaires, and then he gives it to an agency which creates statistics, saying 53% are in favor of, I do not know, homosexual partnerships as being accepted by the church, something like that. So in my opinion, to deepen the concept of synodality, to bring it into exchange with the idea of Catholicity in the sense of a participatory ontology, is the most important way to find a real ecclesial synodality or conciliarity or sobornos. And I really hope that your project can contribute to this. Otherwise, we will lose ourselves in chat groups.
Yes, we'll try. We are also discussed about what to use better: synodality, conciliarity, sobornost, because all these terms have some aspects which add something to this topic. And I would like to ask a question. You mentioned the synodal path, the synodal process, and is it in the Catholic Church of Germany, for example? And my question is it something new for the Roman Catholic ecclesiology, like institution, like a mechanism of decision making, or it is something traditional, maybe having roots in previous examples, and is it a legal instrument of decision making in contemporary Roman Catholic Church?
So thank you for the question. I think no, it is not something completely new. I participated in a synod in my diocese of Hildesheim in the north of Germany many years ago. I think it was around 89. Actually, we prepare a kind of anniversary of the synod in Switzerland in 72. In the whole of Germany, there was a synod in 72 with a lot of inspiration for the renewal and the reform of the church. The documents are still really interesting. And this comes from the movement after the Second Vatican Council. What is new actually, and in this sense, the actual process is not in continuity with the previous synodal process. This actual, but now I give my interpretation. You will find a lot, even the majority of people that give another interpretation. So be careful against myself. I had to interpret one document that was not directly produced by the synod, but by a theological working group promoting or opting for Eucharist, for Eucharistic communion between Protestants and Catholics. But this group is largely the same as those who are mainly engaged in the synodal process. So, and what I discovered was that the option for renewing the church in this document and in the surrounding discussions was replaced by a kind of, how should I explain it? In German, I created the word Sinnflut. So, you know, the Sintflut, this was the fleet where the Ark of Noah was saved. And the Sinnflut is the fleet of meaning produced by the head of theologians that replaces the faith of the church. And this is what is happening actually in Germany. There is a kind of ecclesial vacuum, and this is replaced by ideas of those who like to talk. And there I'm really afraid of what is happening. And yeah, I do not know, because the opposition that is now becoming stronger and stronger, opposing to this process, is very traditional and very much insisting on authority, and we should continue like we did always. So no more creative. And what is really missing is the creative ecclesial process. And I think the bishops are helpless, in my opinion. Helpless, why? They see that the faithful are disappearing. The solidarity with faith, with church, is diminishing. Also because of this these questions of misuse, and you know about it. But I think the bishops are in danger to put their hope too much on this Sinnflut, on this produced meaning, theological meaning, that will never help to bring people back. And many forces now are bound to criticize the church, to create abstract ideas, instead of using the energy of showing how church can live. So my hope is a little bit the renewal of a kind of deaconal dimension of the church, but not in the sense of social work and a kind of fanatism and so on, but deaconal in the very elementary biblical sense of seeing Christ in the other and turning to the other and find God in the flesh. And I think this, once again, maybe it is this ontology that is missing, because we have a secular world that is accepted as the basis of interpretation of the world. And then we try to put in some kind of pious elements that are not realized by the faithful people. And there we need a kind of theology of the secular world, finding God in our flesh, in our historical reality. And this needs a kind of mystagogical process, which I do not yet see. Sorry for my weak words. Maybe
Thank you so much. It is very interesting, and I think we have two last questions, and from Yona and then from Father Andrew, and we will finish our seminar. Please, Yona.
Yes, I was inspired by what was just said. I mean, I think the issue is that there's some kind of sort of a voluntaristic tendency that's sort of leaked into that sort of the ontology that defines what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a human person. I mean, it is that sort of the Cartesian idea of a sort of redefinition of idea by Kant is like the volo ergo sum, or sort of I will, therefore I am. So what I will, I am what I will. And I think that's sort of what gives our age that sort of its tendency that people are, I mean, if people buy into the ontology of humans as creations of their will, or there's sort of that which they think is their will, which is actually a will towards nothingness, if you really think about it, because a will always has to have an object towards which one is moved. And I really think that we should view the idea of will not in that sort of Kantian sense or the modern sense, but rather as something more older or more sort of maybe more Platonic, in the sense that we are always moved by the good and the beautiful and that which is true, and we are moved by that which brings us together, which is common for us. And I think that's sort of at the foundation of that participatory ontology, that sort of ontology that redefines, perhaps redefines as Milbank is suggesting, or Hart is suggesting, it gives a new postmodernity, a sort of a postmodernity that is the challenges that postmodernity which has revealed itself as nihilism.
Yes, thank you for this comment. It is very, very interesting and thought-provoking. And the last question for Father Andrew, please.
More or less what Johannes just said. Your last reflection, Professor Hallensleben, on what the real problems are, seems to me to be so vital, so important. I think you put your finger on lots of things that we need to relate. I mean, I think that you're absolutely right, that The hierarchy is completely out of touch, it seems to me. I mean, who was it? Was it Heather talking about problems in England? Well, one of the problems that Nikitas has caused, if I just, it's well widely known, it's the 100th anniversary of the Diocese of Thyatira in Great Britain, and they're proposing to have a great grand meeting in London. All the parishes are required, there's a big dinner at it, and all the parishes are required to book a table of 10 people and send 10 people down. The price for each person is £100, so that's £1,000 for each parish. And can you imagine the reaction of some of the parishes? I mean, it's not a real world. This celebration of the grandeur of the Greek Orthodox Church in England is not what they're interested in. And that's just a rather blatant example, but I think it's very close to the thing that you're talking about. The hierarchs are looking around for non-answers, answers that will never lead us anywhere. And I know how on earth we get how on earth we get a discussion that goes deeply enough to enable us to see what the future is going to hold. I don't know.
Yes, thank you, Father Andrew, for your reflection on it. And I think we had a very fruitful discussion today, and it was a very great honor for us to see Professor Barbara Hallensleben as our speaker in our seminar series, and I hope that all the participants and especially the students learned a lot. I knew a lot today. And this dialogue on primacy and synodality continues, and I think it can make a great contribution to Christian theology. At the same time, we should not ignore the difficulties it faces, and we should evaluate him critically. And I would like to thank Barbara Hallensleben for this interesting account and give the floor to Irina for a final word.
Well, there is not much I need to add. I join to Andrei thanking everybody, and it just feels that there is a lot more to say, but perhaps we have to stop here because maybe we need to process it as well. And what I heard today, it just gives this very kind of, in my view, so we have like a kind of 3D dimensional picture today by bringing in the perspective of sister churches, because just talking about conciliarity and sobornost from the Orthodox point of view would be probably two-dimensional, and now we have these 3 dimensions, and also we have participants who are coming from Lutheran perspectives, and we just speak the same language. So I think that's really amazing what happened today, and this kind of balance between theological and practical, the ecclesiological approach. This is also important, and I think only theologians can say such kind of critical words about theology. So I think this is important to have this humble perspective to one's own way of life and profession. So thank you very much, and I do hope that Professor Barbara Hallensleben will join us for our next seminars and for this continuation of this project. So have a good evening or good day for the Canada and America, and great to see you all here in Zoom.